Hi there. Welcome, guys. This is Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. This is a show where we talk about self development, emotional exploration, and healthier living. I see Ezra in the chat. Hello, Ezra. Welcome to the show. It's going well. Thank you for asking, guys. So, this is a show. This is not a regular live stream. So, I will not be giving much attention to the comments until the end of the show. So, thank you all for commenting. Thank you guys for being a part of the show. And thank you for the gifts as well. If you guys gift, I will acknowledge you at the end of the show. So, today, guys, I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown. So, I'm going to have Rachel join us in the box here shortly, actually right now, while I give the rundown. So this is Rachel, guys. Rachel, actually just introduce for those of us who don't know.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be back. Hi, Gabby. My name is Rachel. I am a nationally certified counselor. So I work on emotional wellness with students, and I'm helping Gabby co-host the show about self-development, emotional exploration, and healthier living.
Rachel, thank you again for being here, for being a part of the show. So guys, what to expect tonight? So we're going to kind of recap with everybody, see how everybody is doing. We're going to reflect on some good things we've all experienced in the past couple of weeks since the last show. Rachel will give us her tip of the week and her quote of the week. And then we're going to dive into today's topic, which is overcoming grief. We're going to talk about what grief is. We're going to talk about the stages of grief. And we're going to talk about coping mechanisms and how to support our loved ones who also are going through the grieving process. This will be followed by a pop quiz, so pay attention. If you're into note taking, I would recommend doing so because this will benefit you, especially if you are someone who has experienced grief or maybe is currently experiencing grief. And then we're going to have one of my best friends, Miranda, who's in the chat, join us in the box. She is our featured guest today, and we're going to all share our stories about our experiences with grief and how we were able to and still are able to cope with it and overcome it. So with that being said, tonight's show is a little heavy. We're going to be They're going to be raw stories, real stories. All three of us are going to be very vulnerable on an app that most people may not want to be vulnerable on. So I ask that everyone in the comments please respect everyone who's speaking, and bouncers, do what you have to do tonight. If somebody is being disrespectful or breaks any of the meet me terms, the bouncers are going to do what they have to do. But hopefully nobody gets kicked, and nobody, has to be kicked for that reason. Hopefully everybody takes in all the knowledge and experiences we share tonight and uses it in a positive way in their own lives. So let's start off by seeing how everyone is doing. If you are feeling however you're feeling, good or bad, stick it in the chat. I want to see your emojis. Put your emoji in the chat for how you're feeling. Spam those emojis in the chat. If you guys aren't super happy tonight, and if we see maybe some not so happy faces, hopefully by the end of the show those frowns will be upside down. So Cody's doing pretty good. Anybody else willing to share how they're feeling in the chat? Stick those emojis in the chat. Sean's feeling super happy. Oh, and that brings me to my next part of the show, guys, which is tell me something good. I know for a fact that you guys have had some good things happen to you since our last show 2 weeks ago. And I'm talking to you, Sean. I know you had something real good happen to you today. Or was it yesterday? Maybe it was yesterday. So make sure you guys, if you want to share something good that's happened to you in the past couple of weeks. So for me personally, I just got out of training for my new job, and I'm in finance now, which is kind of not at all where I planned on being. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I got out of training. I had my first official day on the job by myself, and it went really smooth. And so I'm happy about that. So, Rachel, what good things have happened to you in the past couple of weeks?
So I have the opportunity to start looking at new cars. Not new,
Oh,
but new to me. So that's a really exciting thing. Yeah. So I finally am in a place where I can manage that. So looking forward to that. Pretty good.
wonderful. I love it. I know I
Big
kind
girl
of put
stuff
you on the
for
spot
us.
there. Big girl stuff. So if anybody else has anything else good going on, stick it in the chat. Let us know. Hello, Roger. Hello, everybody. I would just like to let everyone know again, this is not a regular live stream. This is a show. called Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. So any of the comments will likely not be acknowledged until the end of the show, or when we have some Q&A time during the show. And also gifts as well. So shout out to our gifters so far. We have Sean, Cody, and Ezra. Thank you guys for the gifts. I will acknowledge everyone at the end. And that brings us to our next segment of the show, which is Rachel's tip and quote of the week.
Alrighty, so I'm going to start out with the quote here today, and it comes from Maria Edgeworth. I'll be honest, I don't always know the people the quotes come from. I'm more for the content of the quotes. So today it is, if we take care of the moments, the years will take care of themselves. And I'll be honest, after finding this for the show, I was like, yes, I love this. I'm using it with students where I work and like lots of people who just need a bit of a pick me up. So a fun little tip for emotional wellness that I thought to go with it is to, take things day by day when life becomes overwhelming, because that's kind of what the quote is saying. Like, whoa, if you just live in the moment, you're going to have the years stop by. So if you notice that you're stuck on the what ifs and what if this happens or what if that happens and I don't know where I'm going or what the future holds, take a moment to focus from the what ifs and like a funny play on words with the what is. List 5 things about what is. It can help ground you in the now and give you a better sense of control in the world and help you just be present with the people around you, the things you're doing. And so the tip of today is write down 5 things that are around you to ground yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed with the future. If we take care of the moments, the years will take care of themselves.
Wonderful, Rachel. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's a really good tip for today's topic, which is overcoming grief. For those of you just joining in, my name is Gabby. I'm a licensed physical therapy assistant, and this is Rachel, nationally certified counselor with me in the box. Together, we host this show, Better Together, and we have conversations about self-development, emotional exploration, and happier living. And today, we are talking about overcoming grief. So I think a lot of us might be familiar with what grief is. Grief and loss are words that are kind of interchangeable. It's a negative reaction to losing someone or something in our life. So um, it's not going to always be the loss of a person through death. A lot of people think that grief is related to death, and it definitely is, but it can also be related to the loss of other things, such as losing a job or losing a friendship. Perhaps losing your home in some way. Rather, maybe you decided to move back home with your parents to save money, or maybe you were unfortunately someone who dealt with the Hurricane Ian, and maybe you lost your home and you're dealing with that grief at this time. So we go through different transitions in life. It's normal to go through different transitions in life, and sometimes they can be good and bad, but there is such a good thing as good stress. And Rachel, tell us a little bit more about what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, so Gabby mentioned like those transitions in life. But maybe losing your home and the loss of losing the home was a positive because you have a bigger, better, more accommodating house to go to. That doesn't mean that you're maybe not grieving the loss of that home, those memories, those really positive things that you experienced there, and the comfort of that sameness and that ritual and routine. So we refer to that as eustress. So eustress, spelled EU, stress, funny enough, so it's not spelled how it sounds, refers to positive stress. Think of like weddings and birthday parties, new children running around, a new job. Those are all really positive things. They bring us joy in our life, but they still cause us stress in the sense that it's more effort and energy involved in, doing these really great things. So distress is the bad things, what we automatically assume when we think of stress and stressful stuff. Distress refers to and distress and loss in particular refers to like the loss of a loved one, unexpectedly losing a job and not having a better one to go to. These transitions or changes in our lives that are negative. So when we typically refer to being stressed out, especially related to grief and loss, we think of it in all negative senses, but there can be grief and loss and stress related to really positive events in life too. Yeah.
So in the chat, guys, let me know what kind of transitions in your life have you gone through that were positive but stressful. I'll give my example now. I kind of touched on how I started a new job, a new career in finance recently. So those of you who know me pretty well and come to my live streams regularly know that I do deal with a couple disabilities. And unfortunately, that led to me having to leave my past job as a physical therapy assistant, which I am licensed and educated in. So it was kind of really stressful, distressful to deal with, to have to lose that job. However, I am transitioning into something more positive, which is a new career with a lot of opportunities for growth, and which is really exciting, because in the PTA role, you're generally stuck in a PTA role unless you were to go into like some sort of rehab management. So it's pretty cool seeing the other opportunities I have in this finance field. So I'm really excited to see what can happen.
And that is super exciting. Sounds like you have some eustress in your life too, and some distress before that.
Absolutely. New jobs. So now there's something called complicated grief, and Rachel's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
So, complicated grief, just like all grief, comes in a lot of different forms, and there's a lot of different markers for it. It doesn't just mean like, oh, I'm grieving too long or too much, because that looks different for everybody. But when grief, similar to a diagnosis in the DSM-5, um, grief is diagnosable by certain characteristics that are super extreme. So if somebody's maybe missing work 3-4 days out of the week, or isn't eating, isn't sleeping, and these symptoms, these really heavy symptoms of grief, persist for years or months, depending on their situation, that's what complicated grief is. And there's oftentimes markers for when people are likely going to go through complicated grief, such as maybe not having as many support systems, not as close of friends. So the person, and this grief in particular, complicated grief refers to losing somebody. We're not talking about like a loss of a job or a house, which you can grieve. This is referring to mourning, the process of mourning and getting through that grief for a person. So complicated grief talks about the factors that can more likely cause it, such as like compound grief, or you've lost several relatives really close together and you don't have a chance to grieve one, and then another one happens. Or the closeness of the relationship. For example, like a parent or a sibling or a child are going to be more significant relations in our lives, and that grieving process is going to naturally be more complex or complicated. Given the person's situation in life before they lose someone can also have a huge role in how they deal with, how they mourn that person. So if you are already in the midst of like several transitions, like a new job, a new house, you're very unsettled in life, and then you lose someone, that's going to be more difficult to deal with all those things and effectively grieve. The previous difficult circumstance too, like a history or a background where you've had a lot of death or you've had more traumatic experiences, can also influence how you deal with it. So complicated grief is just all grief is complicated, all mourning is complicated, but complicated grief is the people who are going to maybe want to seek some help at a more professional level. Maybe see someone like me, a nationally certified counselor, to deal with that grief and mourn that person more effectively than someone who is, just on a typical process of grief where it can be really long, but they're able to go to work, they're able to hold a job, they're able to do their daily life, at a degree that they're making it by. So it's just really complicated, really simple. Yeah. We're opposite.
And I think that I, for one, have gone through complicated grief. And again, we're all going to share our stories on grief. Rachel, me, and our guest Miranda tonight will all share our stories. So once again, if you're just joining, this is Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. And together we talk about self-development, emotional exploration, and happier living. And today we are talking about overcoming grief. So Rachel and I just talked a little bit about what grief is, but now we're going to talk about the 5 stages of grief. So The five stages of grief were coined by a Swiss American psychologist named Elizabeth Kubler Ross in 1969, and it's still used and relevant today. So there are five stages, and you actually don't necessarily go through those five stages in order. It's actually not linear. Some of us may experience those stages in different orders. Some of us may relive the stages, even go through them more than once. Some of us may even skip a stage in the grieving process. So I'm going to have Rachel start us off with the first stage of grief.
Yeah, so the first stage is denial. Seems like it should be maybe kind of obvious that that would be the first stage. And again, Gabby mentioned this is different for everyone, but this is what is typical, meaning the majority of people experience grief in a similar fashion. So it looks different for everyone, though. So this first stage is denial. So denial can look like, you know, avoiding life tasks in the sense that, oh, if I do that thing, I'll have to come to terms with them being gone. Or it can look like distracting yourself with extra tasks and throwing yourself into things and, denying that this person is gone, denying that this is a change or a transition you have to get used to. It can feel like shock. Numbness is really intense, or not intense, where you don't feel anything. You don't feel pain, you don't feel sadness, they're gone. You don't feel joy either. It's neither ends of the scale. Confusion and shutting down or isolating from others are really common, signs that you may be or someone around you may be in that denial stage. So it's really typically denial is early on, particularly immediately after finding out about these things. And again, it can last anywhere from a few days to a few months. You can bounce back to the stage at any point. So something you might hear from someone when you ask how they're doing and they're in the denial stage is they'll say, I'm fine, but they're not. Yeah. So just not acknowledging the pain they're going through. And Gabby will take number 2.
Sure. So the second stage of grief is anger. And again, it's pretty self explanatory about what anger is. I think everyone has experienced anger, whether it was grief or not. So being angry can look like being pessimistic, being cynical. Some people use sarcasm to cope. I would even argue like being passive aggressive would be a part of the anger stage of grief. You're more irritable. You're more likely to argue with your close family and friends, easily frustrated, maybe even resentful, even if to the person you lost, rather it could be a death or a breakup or just angry at the whole situation. It's pretty obvious what anger is. It also is affiliated with substance abuse. Using alcohol or drugs could be part of the anger stage as well. So, Rachel, what is the next stage of grief?
Yeah, so the next stage is bargaining. And Gabby said they're all pretty obvious, right? The names of these stages definitely line up with the feelings, the emotions, the things that are happening during them to the people grieving and mourning. So stage 3 is bargaining, which can actually be probably the least clear, I think. So bargaining when you're in grief, particularly when losing a person, can look like guilt or shame about losing the person. Like bargaining, you're weighing the options. If I had done this, maybe they wouldn't have died. Or if I were nicer to them, maybe I wouldn't be feeling this guilt. Um, if I were this, or if it really brings out the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. If I could have done this, they would have been fine. If I should have done that, I should have done this, and then it would have been, our time together would have been better. Or if I would have just done this thing, everything would be okay. And then you're also looking into the future in a really bad way, like very negatively, comparing to others, like bargaining with, like, well, if I do this, maybe I'll be happier. If I change my job or I move across the country, maybe I can run from this feeling of grief. So it's a really, I would argue it's one of the more difficult phases, though I don't think any of them are easy, because it's when you really, from a counseling perspective, you really get down on yourself. And this is where you really start to blame yourself for losing this person. and I'm getting emotional thinking about it, and you blame yourself for not having them, which usually
Yeah,
almost never is the case. Like you really are never to blame.
absolutely. So the next stage of grief is depression. And I think depression is a pretty common thing in the world. So many of us have experienced it, rather it was with grief or with something else. But depression looks like a lot of different things. It can look like a loss of appetite, change in our sleeping habits, reduced energy, um, reduced social interactions with our family and friends. We lose interest in things that we loved at one point. So maybe some of your hobbies, you're not really partaking in them anymore. Depression looks like hopelessness, helplessness, feelings of despair and sadness. It's depression. It's an awful thing to go through. Um, People usually cry a lot more when they're in their depressive stages. I would argue that sometimes people don't even cry during their depressive stages. Sometimes they're just numb. So yeah, so that's the fourth stage is depression, but there is the fifth stage, which is acceptance. So this is where we kind of know it is what it is. We are more present in the moment. We're not dwelling on the past or the future anymore. We have the ability to be vulnerable and to tolerate those negative emotions that we're dealing with. And we can even feel feelings of pride, wisdom, self compassion, and validation. So there are five stages, like I said, to review them. They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So the acceptance stage is what we all aim to get to. And you may get to the stage, and guess what? Maybe you go back to that bargaining stage, or maybe you go back to that anger stage. It is possible to revisit some of these stages. And when I tell my story, I'll be able to give you an example of that. So, thank you all for joining. This is Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. Today, we are talking about coping with grief. We just told you guys what grief is. We reviewed the five stages of grief. And now, Rachel, this is your expertise. How do we cope with grief? What are some strategies we could use?
Well, just like grief is different for everybody and how they experience those five stages is different, how we cope is going to look different for everybody, as we're going to find out in this little conversation we're going to have in a little bit here with Miranda. So as a nationally certified counselor, I can give you some options and, things that I have done with clients in the past, but it is going to look different for you based on, or for everybody based on the stage they're in. Um, So the biggest goal is, that last stage, that acceptance. This is my reality and this is where I'm at. So how do we get there? There's a few different ways that I've seen that were really helpful. So tokens of the person, for example, that can be, keeping their memory alive, keeping pieces of them around. It's ways to keep their memory alive and keep that connection with them that are positive and not holding you back, but helping propel you forward as you live your life as well. Finding new activities to put your energy into and offer some distraction from the negative feelings of grief can be great. Athletic activities, play some basketball, do yoga, pick up knitting, play some video games, photography, journaling. There's so many different outlets, and just creating just to create can be really beneficial at this time because it gives you a way to get that energy out that isn't negative. Finding new groups of people, new supports, new family members to rely on, new friends, getting out in your community, relying on people. I always say resilient people ask for help. So resilience is the ability to get over hard things, and grief is hard. So being able to recognize when you can't do it alone and you need someone with you is really important. So designing your life around the loss of a person can sound kind of strange, but particularly with unexpected grief, we might not know where to go when they're gone. So actually sitting down and making a life plan that doesn't involve them can be difficult, but very healthy, very healing. Um, and seeking counseling, a professional counselor, a nationally certified counselor, a licensed counselor, somebody that is unbiased, who can help you and sit with you through this process of feeling these things. The big thing with grief is it can't be avoided. You can't get over it. I always say you can't get over it. You have to get through it. So if you push them down, they're just going to kind of blow up. So you have to sit with this feeling. You have to acknowledge the pain. You have to acknowledge the loss. And that's when you start to move forward in those stages. So, Gabby, what ways have you coped with grief in the past? I mean, we're going to talk about it
Ooh,
later.
yeah. Well, I've had some, I would say that there are healthy and unhealthy ways to cope with grief and really anything. um, one really, I would say healthy thing that I do is surround myself with people who are supportive. I don't have like the biggest support group, but I do have a few people in my life who I can rely on whenever I need them. So I do make sure that I keep contact with those people and that I don't just like kind of isolate myself and blow them off, because at the end of the day, like, you should really take advantage of the people you have in your life that love you. I mean, it's so important because, like, if you think about it, you just maybe you're grieving the loss of somebody you loved. So take advantage of those loved ones in your life. You know, so that's the most healthy way I've dealt with grief. I've dealt with it in some unhealthy ways I won't mention. Um, but I got through it, not over it, through it. And you guys might be surprised at what story I tell you guys today. It's not the story I was planning on telling you, but yeah. So so speaking of, contacting those loved ones of mine, they helped me get through my grieving process. And maybe they had the tools to help me, maybe they didn't. They just tried their best. But Rachel, what kind of ways can somebody help their loved ones who are grieving?
So, I think the biggest piece of advice to help someone you love who's grieving is that don't try to fix things. You can't bring this person back. The problem is that this person is gone. You can't fix that. So don't try. Just be there with them. You know, misery and joy is company. Just sit with them. Be a shoulder to cry on. Honest to God, let them moan and complain. Let them be upset with you and, validate that for them. Just be very empathetic and maybe a little bit more accepting that they're probably going to be a little flakier. They're probably going to not reach out as much. They might never respond to you checking in on them. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop. And that doesn't mean your presence and your thought isn't helping. People who are in the midst of grief, especially complicated grief, are not okay. And so you can't expect them to be the normal version of them that you had prior to this grieving process. So if you want to be a good friend to someone that you, or a good loved one to somebody who's grieving, my biggest thing is just sit with them. Don't take it personally if they don't respond or reach out, but keep being there. Yeah.
Excellent. So those of you in the chat, if you've experienced grief in some way, shape, or form, or if you've helped a loved one who has been experiencing grief, put a 1 in the chat. I should see tons of 1s because I think most people have experienced grief in some way. Sean, Chris, Cody, thank you guys for participating. Also, sorry that you guys have gone through grief. It's rough. It's rough. But guys, if you're just tuning in, this is Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. This is a show where we talk about self-development, emotional exploration, and happier living. And today we are talking about grief and how we can overcome it. We talked about what grief is. We talked about the 5 stages of grief, excuse me. And we talked about how we can cope with grief and how we can help our loved ones who are coping with grief. So now it's time for our pop quiz, guys. So let's see who is able to retain some of the information that we gave you today. So the first question is, how many stages of grief are typically recognized in the emotional health community? If you know it, just put it in the chat. I won't even give you a multiple choice. If Sean was 3 people, that means 3 people got it right. There are 5 stages of grief. And just to review those one more time, they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Those are the 5 stages of grief.
All right, so listen up, y'all. I hope you were listening. True or false? The stages of grief always come in the same order for everyone. True or false? Pop it in the chat.
Oh no. Oh. Well, Chris got it. False. So
Watch out.
no, we don't. Oh, sorry.
Nah, you're good.
So no, there are 5 stages of grief, but we don't always go through those stages in order. Like I said earlier in the show, sometimes we go through them in different orders. Sometimes we actually go through some of those stages more than once. Sometimes we don't even go through all of the stages. So, yep, that is false. And the next question is a true or false question as well. The process of grieving only applies to death. True or false? That is false. You can grieve many things. You can grieve the loss of a loved one through death, or you can grieve the loss of a friendship or a relationship. You can grieve the loss of a job. You can grieve the loss of a home. You can grieve the loss of your pet. You can grieve the loss of so many things, different transitions in life. So, yeah.
All right, this is a tough one. Who developed the 5 stages of grief? And I don't trust that y'all will remember, so I'm going to give you some options. We have A, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, B, Elizabeth Banks, C, Bob Ross, or D, Mr. Rogers. So who developed the 5 stages of grief? Man, I thought that'd be the one to psych him out. You got it. It's A. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one back in 1969, I believe. She invented those 5 stages. And it's still going strong today and really heavily utilized in the emotional health community.
Mr. Rogers. Yeah, I was wondering if you guys were going to troll us and give us those answers. So if you're just joining, guys, this is Better Together. We just discovered what grief is, the 5 stages of grief, how to cope with it, and how to help your loved ones cope with it. Thank you guys for participating in the pop quiz. And now it is time for our featured guest, Miranda, to join us in the box. If you guys join my streams on occasion, sometimes you'll see Miranda in the chat. She is actually my very best friend, and all 3 of us have known each other since like 2004. So maybe longer. So yeah, we all know each other's stories. So once again, guys, we are about to get vulnerable and share our stories with you all. So bouncers, be on the lookout. Hello, Miranda.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Miranda, I'm going to have you introduce yourself if you want to share anything about yourself, and then I'll tell my story. I want to have you both on the show. Okay. So I'm going to try to make this a short and sweet story for you guys. So a lot of you guys know that about 2 years, it hasn't been quite 2 years yet, 2.5 years ago, I was in a 2-year-long relationship with somebody, and we lived together. And he acted like everything was totally cool and fine. Never really communicated anything with me as far as like concerns in the relationship or, anything like that. So we had our 2-year anniversary. Leading up to that 2-year anniversary, my ex was already in the mourning process of losing me because he had planned on leaving me for several months before he did it. So he already had been mourning, right? So he's going through those 5 stages of grief before I even knew that I was going to have to go through those stages of grief. So basically, leading up to our anniversary date, I was like, money was a little tight at the time. And I said, well, we have the weekend off together, so why don't we plan something together to do? And he was like, yeah, we can. Well, days have gone by, the whole week gone by. We hadn't planned anything. And suddenly the day of our anniversary arrives and nothing was planned. And I was going through a hard time myself. So I took it very personally. I took it super personally that he didn't do took no initiative to do anything special for our day. And he was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, let me go get you flowers. And I was like, don't get me flowers, I don't want flowers, like, you already didn't put any effort into this. Well, he went to the flower shop, got me a bouquet of flowers, and said, oh, I picked every single one out by myself, this is a special bouquet I made for you. And I'm like, what was I supposed to do with that? If you guys want to interject at any time, because you know my story, you can.
Boo!
So anyway, it's 4/20, 2021, and I'm live enjoying my 4/20 duties, as I do on my live stream if you guys visit. That's for another stream. But my cousin Ash, who is a top badge on this app, said to me in the chat, hey, I want you to come over for dinner. And I'm like, okay, I'll come over for dinner. My boyfriend at the time is at work, until like super late at night. So I'm like, that's fine, I'll go for dinner. Well, I arrive and I feel like there's an intervention happening. I'm surrounded by all of my cousins. There is no dinner. And they're like, hey, he reached out to us and said that he was going to break up with you tomorrow at 5 p.m. and that we needed to be there at your apartment so that you don't unalive yourself. And I was in shock. Here's where the grieving process begins. Immediately the grieving process starts, right? I don't know that I went into the denial stage at all, because I immediately was like, okay, this is happening. I got to find a place to live. I got to find out what I'm going to do financially, because I am disabled and getting surgery and I don't have a job. I got to figure all this stuff out. I'm like mourning the loss of my home right now. I'm mourning the loss of this boyfriend I had. I'm calling Dr. Phil. Don't worry, Jeff. We didn't need to call Dr. Phil. We took care of it. But yeah, so with this information, I was like, well, I have to go talk to him and figure out why, because he acted like everything was fine. Meanwhile, it turns out he's coming home from work, I'm live streaming, and he's in the shower literally sobbing because he didn't want to be vulnerable with me and be real with me and explain what was going on. So we came home from work and I'm like, hey, I don't know why you told my family you were going to break up with me, like they weren't going to tell me, but what the heck is going on, man? And instead of giving me a valid explanation, his only explanation was, well, I can't really handle your mental health. That was what he said to me, which was terrible for me, right? Because I'm like, already, as you guys know, if you come to my stream a lot, I do deal with some mental health issues. I have like an anxiety disorder. I have PTSD. I'm bipolar. Lame. I agree. Super lame, right? So I'm not only mourning him, but Mother's Day is coming up the next month. And my mom had passed away 18 years ago last year on this Mother's Day. So I was already not looking forward to dealing with that Mother's Day, with also dealing with this breakup, right? So this leads me to Mother's Day, where I had a box. I'm gonna actually, it's the end of spooky season, and I'm gonna give you a spooky story real quick. So I had a box that my aunt gave me, and it was all moldy, and there was lots of broken glass, and there were spiders in it, and I was afraid to go through it by myself. So I kept asking my boyfriend, who I had at the time, could you go through the box with me? Yeah, I'll go through it with you. Well, it never happened, right? So, it's a couple weeks into our breakup, and it's Mother's Day. And I'm sitting there alone in my apartment, which, by the way, he took everything out of our apartment. I was left with my bed, a dookie couch, and a table, and my 2 cats, which he tried to also take my cat, by the way. And he didn't, thank goodness, because that's my baby. I would have been mourning the loss of my cat as well. So I was losing the loss of my home, I'm losing my boyfriend, I'm losing, and now it's Mother's Day. And so I have this box of stuff, and I'm like, I guess I got to go through it. So I don't know if anybody here is supernatural or, thinks any of that stuff is real. But if you find coins in places that are like particular or like certain patterns, it could mean that somebody's trying to speak to you from the spiritual realm. And I found a coin in my sage bowl, which was a gift from my ex's mom, by the way. And I had never used it. And I was like, I'll take this as a sign that I should sage the house. And I saged the box. I saged me. I had a picture of my mom on my little table, and I saged that as well. And I proceeded to go through that box. Mostly everything was destroyed. So again, I'm mourning the destroyed of stuff that was my mom's. Also while mourning all of this stuff. And I did find one photo album where when I picked it up, a coin fell out. So that was pretty crazy, right? Because I found a coin in the sage bowl. On the front of the photo album said Mother's Day 1996, which was crazy because it was Mother's Day. So naturally, I just started to sob. I opened up the album and it's pictures of tombstones of our loved ones with orbs in them. My mom claimed she was a medium and she was very spiritual. So seeing that was like, whoa, like I'm not sure exactly how to take this message. This is crazy. And I never found out exactly how my mom passed away. I was 9 years old and everyone told me it was a heart attack. So I had to go through I decided, what I'm going to do, I'm going to order her death certificate because nobody had it. And I figured out that she had passed due to a accidental death, due to an overdose. And I got angry at her. I got into that anger stage of grief, which I had already been in the acceptance stage because it had been 18 years. So I was angry because I was like, you knew the consequences of what could have happened. She was in nursing, and I was just like, wow, I was so upset when I found out how she passed away. And then I found out she had an insurance policy as well, actually, through all of this, which is a great thing that I found. But I'm like mourning the loss of my mom again, while I'm mourning the loss of my boyfriend, while I'm mourning the loss of my apartment and everything we had established together. So yeah, that is pretty much my story in a nutshell.
Sounds like some complicated grief and some regression in the stages where
Yeah.
that like anger,
Yeah. So I told you guys this is a heavy episode. I didn't cry though. So we're good there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and crying's a good thing, so don't like shame yourself for crying if you do.
Right.
But yeah, so that is, that was my grieving experience in the past year. And I cope with that by having, really having my family and friends but with me, and staying in contact with them, and grinding on the app. I put all of my all into live streaming, which probably was the let's see, what stage do you think that was? Bargaining or avoid or denial, maybe. That was probably denial. I put all of my all into streaming, like every ounce of my being I put into live streaming to avoid all of the grief. And I may have partaken in some adult beverages more than I should have. So that was my bad coping strategy. But at the end of the day, I have accepted what happened. I don't really, as far as the breakup, it doesn't really affect me too much anymore, except that now I have more of an anxious attachment style, which that's a whole nother ball game we'll get into one day on the show. But yeah, that is my story. So if you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to add anything, feel free.
I just want to add for our viewers that like that's a lot, and she's been live streaming still and doing all this impressive stuff. I don't know. I just like seeing you, Gabby, cope with all of that is just really impressive. And looking from a counseling perspective, it's just resiliency. Again, the definition of resiliency is, your ability to overcome tough situations and be okay through it. And I would say your resiliency is really, really high.
Well, I appreciate that. Not the first time I've heard that either. I actually want to get the word resilient tattooed on me someday.
I love that word.
I do too. All right, Rachel, it is your turn to tell us about your grief experience. And if you guys are just tuning in, this is Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. Rachel is a nerdified.
I am nerdified.
Nationally certified counselor. I'm a physical therapy assistant, and together we talk about emotional exploration, healthier living, and self-development. And today we are with Miranda, who is one of our great friends, who's also going to share her experience with grief. So Rachel, you can take it away.
If I don't cry, I'll be very proud of myself. So I'll try to keep this brief too, because like Gabby mentioned earlier in the show, I would say that we both went through situations of more complex or complicated grief where it was compounded and there was like a lot going on. So my story starts, I had a lot of deaths. I come from a very big family, and when I say very big, I mean I have 2 reunions each year of about 100 to 150 people. So I have about 300 relatives I keep in contact with throughout the year. So I had a lot of deaths in that sense when I was a kid, of great aunts being older or people passing away. I had a couple younger cousins who were older than I was, but like died prematurely. So I had minuscule times of death, lost grandparents. But when in 2018, my main grief story starts off with my grandfather passed away. My last grandfather, my dad's dad. So he was 81-ish. So he had lived a good life, had a heart attack. I'm like, wow, this is tough. I certainly went through the stages. A month later, my 23-year-old cousin, I was 23 at the time as well, dropped dead of a heart attack. Unknowingly on the volleyball court. So that was really drastic. And same side as my grandfather, so that family was hit kind of hard. Fast forward 4 months later, we're into 2019, and my mom's mom passed away. My grandmother, she was 91, so again lived a long life, and I've definitely mourned all of these people, particularly my younger cousin. It seemed premature, but the other two, people live their time. It was so hard. Like, the family had to adjust, and it was tough. And I was like, wow, these are the biggest losses I've ever felt in my life. I'd had some of these big, smaller, not as close to me deaths, but all of a sudden, 2 grandparents and my cousin. And then my parents decided to get divorced, which I was 24, so it really didn't have that much bearing on me, but it was enough. So then I lost my childhood home. And then that was tough. I was grieving that, really compounded. I really didn't get over my grandpa, didn't get over my cousin, didn't get over my grandma, because now I was losing my childhood home. My parents were divorcing. And then my mom died. And if I'm being honest, Gabby was someone who was very much a pillar for me, because that was my biggest fear most of my life, was losing my mom. I'm definitely going to cry. And that's who gave me support through all these other griefs. That's who gave me support through every single loss. So who was going to support me? But I knew Gabby. I had 2 other people in my life and Gabby, 3 people that I knew about my age who had lost their mom at some point. And it was like, holy cow. If she can do all these great things and get through her life, then like I can too. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but there are people around me that have done this. So by golly, I'm going to do it. And Gabby, I don't know if you've ever like expressed that to you, like the extent, but you were one of 3 people that I look to that I'm like, wow, like, you can get through it. You can mourn these losses. You can get through this life without these people, without these things, without these houses. And I was actually in my 2nd year of graduate school for counseling, for clinical mental health counseling is the program I was in when my mom passed, and I refused to drop out at the time. And I was in Disney World with another friend. I already had the tickets before this all happened. And the professors messaged me and were like, hey, you're great, but you can't do this. You need to take a break. And I did. And I came back in 2020 when everything was virtual, still grieving pretty hard. I still accepting that I'd lost 4 people in a short period of time. And then COVID happened 6 months later, and it was like a whole new sort of grief that everybody was going through. And I realized that my grief was a tool, because I had learned how to go on past really hard things, and I could do that again. And then about not quite a year after my mom passed, I was in a class that was grief and loss counseling. And it was terrible. I felt I had gone through all those stages. But then all of a sudden it was back at square one. I'm in this class, but I'm okay. My life is fine. I'll get through this. I can do this. And I wasn't admitting until I went through that class as how much I was hurting. Like I was really in the denial stage for 10 months and didn't know, basically. I had thrown myself into my work. I was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I was a full-time manager at a drive-in theater. And at the same time, I was a full-time childcare director at a childcare center. So literally 80 plus hours a week at minimum. And I did that and I did that and I did that. And then I took this class and I was like, I can't do this. And that was when I really started to mourn and come to terms with that this was the reality. I had lost all these people. I'd lost most of my support system and I had to rebuild it. And I started reaching out to the people that tried to reach out to me, but I was like, I can't do this type thing. I feel like I'm all over the place with this.
I was all over the place too.
But I think in the grand scheme of things, it was about 3 years ago now that 3 years and 2 months that I lost my mom. And that was like the really big one, like the super bomb. And to this day, I am still cycling through those stages. But I have a lot of analogies, and it's made me a better, counselor, nationally certified counselor, because I've felt these things, I've gone through these things, and I can kind of touch that place with someone else. So when I lost my mom, that was like the big bomb. And now I look forward and it's terrifying. Like I am going to hopefully live a longer life than I knew my mom. I only saw her, and Gabby already has, for example. And that's terrifying. The person that brought you into this world, the person that's supposed to love you unconditionally and is a really important relationship to a lot of people, is just gone. What do you do? And I come to terms with that most of the time, but every so often I say it's like a whole, the stronger you love someone, the more you're going to grieve. So that love has to go somewhere, right? When it's gone, something has to take its place, but grief goes there. And so it's this big hole, and it kind of like shifts down, and it's smaller and smaller and smaller. Some people say you grow around your grief. But then certain things will happen and I lose my cool, and my grief is just all encompassing again. Like I'll be driving down the road and I'll hear, a song that we used to sing all the lyrics to and laugh. Or my gosh, in the grocery store, I'll look at a grocery and I'll just immediately think of her. And it's frustrating for me personally because I feel like because I lost my mom after all those other people, I didn't get a chance to give them their space and give them their time. And I feel like that's a really great example of complicated grief, because I'm still, I'm really grieving my grandma right now. Like I'm in the season of I miss my grandma. She died almost 4 years ago, and I never had a chance to miss her because I had all these other things. So grief is tough, but when you look around at the strong people around you, it can really help propel you forward. And I still struggle every day, even as a counselor, I get jealous. That's, the anger stage of grief is so stinking hard to sit with, because especially when you're a compassionate person, and, I think Gabby, Miranda, and I all are pretty cool. And we really care about other people. When you care about other people, it can really hurt when you're angry that they have that person, when you're jealous that they get to do that thing, when you're jealous that they get to go out there and have a grandparent to watch their kids. That's me personally. I get so mad when I see people around me that I love have kids and have a grandma to watch them. And that's not fair to them. I would never tell them. That's something I have to deal with. And it can feel very lonely, because you can feel like a really bad person when you're in grief. So, going back to my advice, when you know someone that's grieving, you just be there. Like they're probably beating themselves up more than anyone else could. So, yeah, I'm like shaking, and grief's a tough thing, but having the people in your life to support you is really beneficial.
Rachel, thank you for being vulnerable, and Miranda, thank you in advance for being vulnerable yourself. Um, yeah, grieving is really hard, and I am absolutely flattered that you looked up to me and how I dealt with my loss. I didn't really think about it in that perspective. So I'm glad that in some way I was able to help you, even though you and I didn't talk a whole lot during that time.
Gabby, my mom loved you too.
I know I loved your mom too.
So just Miranda too. Oh my gosh.
She was like one of the only people that like really believed in me in high school. So she was a great person. I'm sorry for your loss. I know it still hurts. I mean, my mom passed away 19 years ago in October, and I still grieve. And somebody said it might have been you. It doesn't get easy, it gets different.
It doesn't get better, it gets different.
Yeah, that's it. It gets different. Because the holidays are really hard. I grieve my mom around the holidays a lot. And speaking of how you said that you almost didn't get to grieve your grandma, I recently was thinking about my grandma, my mom's mom, and I actually kind of skipped over grieving her because when she was on the verge of passing away, my dad actually kept me away from her and that side of the family for like several years. So I didn't see my grandma decline, really. I just kind of saw her at the end, and it was horrible. But I was also still grieving my mom and in a really abusive household. So I didn't really get the chance to grieve my grandma. So I was thinking about that actually yesterday. So I can relate to you there. But if you guys are just tuning in, this is Better Together with Gabby and Rachel. Today we're talking about grief. It's a heavy episode, so thank you all for being so respectful and supportive in the chat. I really appreciate it. I just shared my grief story from my ex of 2 years who up and left and ghosted me during the time when I was about to get surgery and right around Mother's Day, which was hard on me because I had lost my mom, and then rediscovering how my mom actually passed away, which kind of re-triggered some of my mourning process. And Rachel shared her horrible experience of so much loss that she experienced in the past like 5 years or so. She lost a lot of people, so that's really it's such a tragedy to go through. But now Miranda may have a different perspective on grief to share with us. So thank you again for being here and for being vulnerable with us. And you can share your story.
Okay. I will say there's a quote that I have heard probably every day for like the past 5 years. It takes a village. And sometimes it really, really does. And that village really, really, really helps you through the grieving process a lot. And if you don't have that village, sometimes it takes a lot longer to get through all these heavy feelings and get through all these things that are happening to you. So, if you have a village, use them for support because you will need them. Well, I guess I will start. So my grieving process kind of starts and continues from like 2013. So back in 2010, I had, what do you guess? Met a boy. And, we were together through high school. 2010, I was in 10th grade, 9th, 10th grade. So we were young, I was with him through the first semester of college. I had gone to get a psychology degree. Funny enough, I was, doing just fine, going to class every day, getting good grades, getting all that stuff. And then, you kind of see it coming, but he ended up cheating on me more than once, but specifically with one person over and over. And it wasn't just physical, it was mental and all of that stuff. So then he came to my dorm, had me come outside, and broke up with me in the parking lot of my dorm. And that was terrible for me. You don't think 2 to 3 years is a long time until you're in that mental fog of, we were together for so long. That's the person you've been with every day for that long. As an adult, I'm like, 3 years, that's nothing. But, back then, it totally, like, incapacitated me. I stopped going to class. I stopped submitting reports. I stopped submitting homework. I stayed in my dorm. I didn't go to lunch. I didn't go to dinner. My roommate tried to get me to go literally anywhere, and I wouldn't go. I'd worked at Dollar General, and I took a lot of days off, sick days, just to sit in my bed and be depressed about it. And my grades totally tanked, and my professors were emailing me, "Hey, is everything okay? You're failing our classes." So I ended up withdrawing from college and moving back in with my mom. So that was uh, a fun time. Um, I ended up working myself to death. I worked, my normal 40 hours at my store at Dollar General, and then I picked up hours at other stores around me, and I worked and I worked and I worked. And, I loved the money and I loved the distraction, but it wasn't, that's not something that you need to do. I was working like 60 to 80 hours a week. And then I had gotten a promotion. They promoted me to store manager, and I was there from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. and back at it the next day. It was just, that was me. What stage denial? I just was not feeling anything. I was totally ignoring everything. And, Gabby was there through all of it. And, in betwixt all of that, I tried to date. And you know what? I wasn't fully grieved through that breakup. And out of my knowledge, and I didn't mean to, but I hurt those people. And they were people I cared about, that I was friends with prior to dating them. And I really did things that I never would have wanted to do. And, thinking back, I'm like, if they had done that to me, I wouldn't be okay. And, it's terrible. And then, working myself to death, all those things happening. And then Q guy who broke up with me in college came back. And since I didn't fully let myself heal, I thought maybe if we get back together, everything will go back to normal. All of this will just get shut behind a closet and it will be fine. And, the house looked nice on the outside. New siding, new roof, maybe some decorations, but inside it was the same old rundown house. Nothing changed. And after a while, something made me realize there was a situation. It was my birthday, and he had gotten me a ring and gave me a ring. And I was like, oh my gosh, a ring? Like, I'm so excited. This is great. But he made it a point to say it was not an engagement ring or not a commitment to marriage in the future. It was just a ring. And something clicked in my head. I was like, no, this is not what I want. Like, we don't want the same things in life at all. I want to build a future with someone who wants to do the same things as me, but I became a person I never wanted to be, and I hated her. I did not like myself. So I kind of stayed in the relationship as like a backdrop. I was in it, but not in it. So then I met someone new, and I left that guy and was with this new guy. And we had an accident, and we both stayed at a friend of ours' house. We all met through work. He had kids and a wife. who he claimed he was getting divorced from. However, finding out later, which was untrue. Very awkward. She also worked with us. Made it very awkward. You know, and I'm like, what was I thinking? Why would I do something like this? And thinking back now, I'm like, it was the grieving process. Like, I wasn't feeling anything. There was nothing. It was just totally empty. So for whatever reason, we had signed a lease for an apartment, bought a TV together, got a bed. It was like $1,200. You know, we got planned for the future. And then in January of 2017, I found out I was pregnant. And this new feeling came over me. Gabby was one of the first people I called. You know, she was like, what do you want to do? Are you going to have it? Do I need to drive you somewhere? Do we need to make an appointment? And I'm like flipping out. I did not know what to do. And, you know, there could have been two totally different routes of grief there, you know. But I chose the route where I kept the baby. However, I lost the guy. He totally dipped out, left the job, and went back to the wife, and stopped talking to anyone that we talked to together, we were friends with together. Nobody heard from him. So it was just me, pregnant, in an apartment I couldn't afford. So again, I was working and working and working. You know, I still felt nothing inside. Felt like my life was over. A single parent. What am I supposed to do with a kid? You know, and I don't know if any of you in the comments are parents, but you know, people talk about the connection you have with a child. It's different from anything else, especially when you carry a child. You know, everyone's like, oh, you know, the baby's in there. It's great, a great feeling. I felt nothing. You know, I will admit I felt nothing for my daughter when she was inside of me. Even after she was born, I felt no connection to her because I wasn't fully there. And I was grieving my independence, and I was doing everything alone. And it really, really hurt, and it was very hard. And then, you know, then COVID happened. And the social media fad kind of picked up and boomed, and, you know, all these new people are on social media, and TikTok blew up, and everybody's on Facebook, Instagram, Meet Me, you know, and they're doing shows like these where they talk about these things. And I saw those videos and people, and I knew something needed to change. So all of a sudden, I decided to change my mindset. I stopped looking for someone to fix me and decided to fix myself instead, because I knew I needed to do that for myself and for my child. And when I said it takes a village, sometimes you have to build it. It helps. So then, you know, I'm working hard on myself and for my child, and worked hard at my job. At this point, I had a new job with better pay, so I was able to afford my life. Worked really hard for promotions and raises, and opened up new friendships. You know, while during the grieving process, like Rachel said, you kind of push everybody away. You stop letting yourself be open for these people, especially for new people. You know, you create a savings plan, and eventually I bought and owned a trailer with a friend of mine, and you know, everything worked out great. Eventually, I won't go into the issues that kind of brought apart, but after buying the trailer, Then another hard hit. I ended up with a health condition called POTS, what Gabby has. It just like suddenly happened, if you don't stop, your body kind of forces you to do it. If you work it too hard, if you do too much, your body says, stop, this is too much. Can't do it anymore. And that's what my body did to me. It said, you're doing too much. We can't. So kind of restarted the grieving process again. And but this time I know what to do because I learned that I need to stop relying on other people and use myself. And you got to change the mindset. You got to stop thinking about all the bad things and focus on the good things and the future and not the past. And it's you got to just change the mindset, and it helps to have those people, and it helps to open up for those people to help you. You can't always do it by yourself. And I know that was a lot that I just did. It kept coming and coming and coming, and then you're still going through it, and sometimes it just happens like that. But you gotta remember to stay on course, and you're allowed to grieve, and you're allowed to go through the bad parts of grief. Feeling empty and the anger and the resentment. But eventually you'll come out the other side, and like Rachel said, it's not better or something about being different. What did you say?
It doesn't get better, it just gets different.
Yeah, it just gets different. So that's my story.
Miranda, thank you so much for sharing your story and for being vulnerable. I'm really happy that I was able to be a positive impact to both of you during your grieving processes. And we do only have 2 minutes left of the show. So is there anything else you'd like to add, Rachel?
I think to wrap it up, grief is just the process of, losing someone and getting through it, or losing a thing, a relationship, a house, and all kinds of stuff, and how you come out on the other end. Yeah.
Well, this is a heavy episode, guys. We were all very vulnerable tonight, and I am hoping that you guys got something out of this. So let me see some. You might have some sad emojis now because we did have a sad story, but put your emojis in the chat. How are you feeling after this? Do you feel like you've gotten something out of our stories? Maybe it's going to help you in your grieving process as well. I know. Usually we hope that everybody feels better after the show, but this was a heavy episode. But thank you guys so much for being here. We are here, and we got through it. We're still grieving. Each of us are still grieving for sure. I think that grieving might be a lifelong thing. Right. I don't think it's necessarily something that just ends, unfortunately. But it's part of being human, and it's part of healing and growing as people. So thank you again, guys, for being here. Please favorite Rachel and Miranda. They both don't live stream that often, but if you ever want to catch them, maybe you will if you favorite them. Favorite me if you'd like to come back next week. We're going to discuss, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I believe we're going to be discussing vision boards next week. Yeah. So if you guys are interested in being a guest on the show, please reach out to me on Instagram. Gabby Uke is my Instagram. Somebody will put it in the chat. It is officially the end of the show, guys. So thank you again so much for being here and for taking part of the show. And I hope that you all have a wonderful night. I'll catch you next Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our show time is changing. It'll be 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next week, or maybe a different time. We'll figure it out. I'll let you know as soon as we find out. All right. Everyone have a wonderful Tuesday evening, and keep it real. Bye.
Bye.